I worked the overnight shift at that gas station for almost 2 years, and in all that time, only one night ever made me quit a job on the spot. But before that night, there was another incident, one that really makes me wonder about things. I was 29 years old when this happened. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, mostly from home, which was a small 2-bedroom bungalow in a quiet subdivision in a town of about 80,000 people. It was a pretty typical suburban life, you know. I had my routines: wake up, coffee, work on client projects, maybe a walk with my neighbor's dog if she was out of town, dinner, some television, then bed. Pretty boring, honestly. And that's probably why this particular afternoon stuck with me so much. It was so out of the ordinary from my very ordinary life. It was a Tuesday, I think, or maybe a Wednesday. The kind of day where one blurs into the next. The weather was mild, late spring or early summer. I remember because the windows were open just a little to let in a breeze. I was in my home office, which was the second bedroom, staring at a half-finished logo design for a local bakery. I'd probably been there for an hour, totally in the zone, when I heard a knock at the front door. Now I wasn't expecting anyone. I rarely got surprise visitors. My friends usually texted first, and the mail carrier just left packages on the porch. So the knock was already a little unusual. It wasn't a tentative knock, like someone was unsure if they had the right house. It was firm, purposeful, not aggressive, but not shy either. I paused my music, took off my headphones. The knocking came again, a little louder this time. My stomach did a little flip, nothing major. Just that slight sense of unease you get when something disrupts your routine. I walked from the office, through the living room, to the front door. I looked through the peephole. Standing on my porch was a man. He was wearing a dark blue, almost black, jumpsuit-style uniform. It had patches on the shoulders, though I couldn't make out the details from the peephole. He had a clipboard in one hand and a tool belt around his waist. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, average height, average build, with short dark hair. Nothing particularly distinctive about him, just a regular guy doing a job, or so I thought. He must have heard me moving inside because he smiled at the peephole, a kind of professional, practiced smile. I didn't open the door right away. Instead, I stood there, debating. My first thought was, maybe he's selling something. I get those sometimes, people trying to get you to switch internet providers or whatever. But the uniform looked official. He knocked again, a bit more insistently. I took a deep breath and opened the door, but only about a 5-inch gap keeping the chain lock engaged. I peered out at him. He immediately launched into his spiel. He said, "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm from the gas company, and we're detecting a possible leak in the area. We're going house to house to check the lines." He gestured vaguely down the street with his clipboard. His voice was calm, professional, exactly what you'd expect from someone like that. I remember thinking, a leak? I hadn't smelled anything. Plus, my gas lines were all underground. He continued, saying he just needed to come inside for a few minutes to check the meter and the connections. He held up what looked like a small handheld device, which I assumed was some kind of gas detector. Now, I'm a pretty trusting person usually, but something felt off. It wasn't anything he said specifically, or even how he looked. It was more of a gut feeling, a tiny, almost imperceptible prickle of unease that went beyond just being bothered by an unexpected caller. Maybe it was the suddenness of it, or the fact that I'd never heard of the gas company sending people door to door like that without notice. You'd think they'd send out letters or something if there was a leak. I tried to think. Had I seen news reports about gas leaks? No. Had I received any official-looking mail? No. And the uniform, it looked professional, but I couldn't quite read the company name on the patch. It wasn't the usual logo of our local gas and electric provider. It looked a bit generic. My mind started racing. I was home alone. Always was during the day. All my neighbors were at work too. It was a quiet street, very quiet. I lived there for 5 years and never once had anyone try to get into my house that wasn't invited. He was still smiling, a patient, slightly expectant smile. His eyes were a little too still, a little too focused maybe. Or maybe I was just imagining that. The hair on the back of my neck was beginning to stand up. I knew I needed to say something, and quickly. My brain scrambled for an excuse, something to get rid of him safely, and then, without even thinking, the words just came out. "Oh, my husband's actually just in the back taking a nap," I said. "I'll go get him for you." It was a complete lie. I wasn't married, and I certainly didn't have a husband napping anywhere in my house. I was completely alone. But as soon as the words left my mouth, something in the man's eyes shifted. The professional smile faltered, just for a split second. A flicker of something unreadable passed over his face. His shoulders seemed to slump, losing that crisp official posture. He mumbled something like, "Oh, okay, never mind then, we'll come back later," or something. It was very quiet, very dismissive. He turned away from my door almost immediately, without another word, without looking back at me. He just walked right off my porch, got into a dark blue van that I hadn't even noticed parked down the street, not directly in front of my house, but a bit further down, obscured by a big oak tree, and drove away. The whole thing couldn't have lasted more than a minute or two. I stood there, still with the chain on the door, watching him drive off. My heart was pounding, really pounding now. That little prickle of unease had turned into a full-blown wave of dread. The way he just left so abruptly after I mentioned my non-existent husband, it was too fast, too convenient. If he was truly from the gas company detecting a leak, wouldn't he have waited? Wouldn't he have said something like, "I can wait for him to wake up," or, "We still need to check your house, Mom?" But no, he just left. I closed the door, locked the deadbolt, and stood with my back against it for a long moment, listening. My house was so quiet, too quiet. I heard the distant hum of traffic, the chirping of birds outside, but nothing else. I walked to the living room window, pulling back a corner of the curtain. The street was empty. The dark blue van was gone. I spent the rest of the afternoon feeling incredibly jumpy. Every little creak of the house, every whistle of the wind through the open window made me flinch. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. What if I hadn't said my husband was home? What would have happened? The thought sent shivers down my spine. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he really was from the gas company and just had a bad day. Maybe he was new and didn't know the proper protocol. I tried to rationalize it, to make it fit into my ordinary, predictable world. But the feeling of deep unease persisted. Later that evening, after dark, I was making dinner. I usually had the news on in the background, just for some noise. It was a local news channel, the 6 o'clock broadcast. I wasn't really paying much attention, just chopping vegetables, when a segment came on. It was a consumer alert. They showed a composite sketch, a drawing of a man's face. It was the face of the man who had been at my door earlier that day. My knife clattered onto the cutting board. My hand started shaking. The news anchor, in her calm, professional voice, explained that police were looking for an individual who had been impersonating a utility worker. They were operating in our area, she said, warning residents to be cautious and to always verify identification. Then she went into more detail. This man and an accomplice had been targeting homes. The modus operandi was chillingly simple. The man at the door would gain entry, pretending to be from a utility company. While the homeowner was distracted, inspecting a fake leak or a meter reading, the accomplice, who was already hiding somewhere near the property, would slip inside through an unlocked back door or window, or sometimes even through the front door right after the first man had distracted the homeowner. Then they would ransack the house, taking valuables. The news report said that in several instances, the accomplice had already been inside the house, hiding, by the time the first man even knocked on the door. It was a really unsettling detail. That meant one of them was potentially already on the property, waiting for the signal, while the other was making casual conversation at the front door. But the most disturbing part came next. The police were appealing to the public for information on how these men were choosing their targets. They knew the general area, but they couldn't figure out the pattern of which houses were being hit. They wanted to know if anyone had noticed anything odd leading up to the incidents. Stood in my kitchen, frozen, staring at the television. The image of the man's face, clear as day. The way he'd suddenly deflated when I mentioned my husband. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. He wasn't looking for a leak, he was looking for a husband. Or rather, the absence of one. My mind went back to the quiet street, my neighbors always at work. Which was probably visible to anyone who spent a little time watching. the way my car was always parked there during the day, indicating I was home. But then again, my house was dark at night when most people were home. Maybe they had been watching for a while. Maybe they knew I lived alone. The thought that someone might have been watching my house, observing my comings and goings, was incredibly disturbing. Had I left my back door unlocked that day, I always tried to be careful. But sometimes, on a warm day, I'd open the back screen door to let air circulate while I was working. Could someone have slipped in? The uncertainty was the worst part. I didn't know if an accomplice had been lurking. I didn't know if they had already been inside my house, hiding, waiting for me to be distracted by the man at the door. I didn't know if my lie had simply foiled their plan for entry, or if it had prevented something far worse. I remembered the slight hesitation, the flicker in his eyes. He must have recognized a key indicator he was looking for, or not looking for. A single woman home alone was probably an ideal target. A woman who says her husband is home, that instantly changes the dynamics. It presents an unknown element, a variable they couldn't control. I called the non-emergency police line right after the news report ended. My voice was shaky as I explained what had happened. They took down my statement, asked me to describe the man, the van, the uniform. I told them about the way he reacted when I mentioned my husband. The dispatcher sounded grim. She said it was a good thing I didn't open the door fully. She suggested I check all my locks and windows and maybe get a security system. After the call, I walked through my house, every single room. I checked every window latch, every door lock. I even looked under beds, in closets, behind the shower curtain, my heart still thumping. I felt like I was searching for a ghost. I found nothing, no sign of forced entry, no indication that anyone had been inside. But that didn't really reassure me. If they were really good, they wouldn't leave a trace. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every shadow outside my window, made me jump. I kept thinking about the news segment, the police not knowing how they chose houses. My lie about having a husband wasn't a clever plan. It was just a desperate, spur-of-the-moment reaction, but it had worked. And it probably saved me from something terrible. I never heard anything more about that particular case. The news didn't follow up with updates beyond that initial alert. To this day, I don't know if my house was surveilled, if they knew I lived alone, or if my interaction was just a random test. The whole experience left a deep impression on me. I became much more cautious. I installed motion sensor lights, I bought a better peephole. I even considered getting a guard dog, though I never did. My neighbors noticed I was jumpier, more reserved. I just told them I'd had a scare, vaguely referencing a weird encounter. What still bothers me years later is the uncertainty, the pure, unadulterated luck of saying